Basically, the goal of today's session is to have you guys really start to think about some of the strategic questions you should be asking yourselves along the pathway to building an effective creator strategy soup to nuts. So just from like the really early stages all the way to wrapping the program, just thinking what are some of the factors that I should really be thinking about every time I am executing a creator strategy. What we're going to talk about a little bit before we get into it is just some of the key pillars of today's culture of influence. So as things really change, what is most important to think about online is what matters most to the online consumer as we see these shifts. What we're seeing online right now is pretty much a collective exhaustion around years and years and years of kind of an inauthentic, more contrived way of delivering messages, which at first is what birthed influencer culture. And then over time, we started to realize maybe that influencers, they're paid for, they're bought and paid for. So really driven by Gen Z, but overall, I think all of us older marketers in the room also kind of feel this way. The number one most important value and key pillar of today's culture of influence is authenticity and accessibility. Your content should always feel real and relatable. Consumers want transparency. It's cool if it's an ad, but it just has to feel like that creator really does enjoy that product, would like that product, and that should be a really important part of your selection. The second is community and connection. You want to always ensure you're doing your best as a business or brand to help foster authentic connection and build that connectivity between audiences and between other people who share the common interest or the common need for what you have to offer. The third, and this is my absolute favorite, is positivity and humor. A lot of brands don't really jump in to understand that the internet is a space for escape. And that is because it is also a space where there's a lot of negativity and a lot of news. Can any of you guys raise your hands if sometimes you get a little bit of internet exhaustion from all of the news and the scary stuff and the darkness and you need to take a break? Cool, if you're a business or brand, help foster the escapism and the humor and the fun on the internet. Don't take yourself too seriously. Give people that space that they're looking for. It was a long COVID. There's been lots of wars, all sorts of stuff. We don't need that. Integration and inclusion. This is super important. Also came up a lot during COVID. I'm sure many of you remember creating inclusive spaces for people to feel an inherent sense of belonging. We don't live in a world anymore where everything that you're doing online has to be catered to a very specific demographic. Even if you have a target demographic in mind, just think more about the psychology and the behavioral patterns of people as human beings, as opposed to like, oh, I'm catering to this very narrow age demo or this very narrow ethnicity or whatever it is. Don't wait until Black History Month to feature Black people. Don't wait until Pride Month to feature gay people. Don't wait until, any sort of disability awareness day. Like just, your influencers can look any number of ways. Don't judge what your influencer's audience is based on what your influencer is, right? Because how they create content might not be an exact, like let's say you have a disabled influencer in a wheelchair, not all her content, she could be a fashion influencer. So just try to break free of the shackles of what you think their audience is based on what they look like on the outside. Then you have cultural relevance. This is the reason why TikTok matters. This is the reason why all the brands have pivoted. You want to always be able to, as much as possible, align your business or brand with current trends and immerse yourself in the culture as it is. So what this means is, here's what I would advise. If it's at all possible, have someone on your staff, or at least have your marketing manager have a dedicated set of hours that's entirely for social listening and immersion. Your marketing people or yourself as a marketing person should simply love the internet. That is the only thing that's contributed to the success of my career. I love the internet. I breathe the internet. I live on the internet. So even if my target demographic is like a 20-year-old boy, I'm like, I kind of know what a 20-year-old boy is talking about on the internet because I make it my job to listen at all times. That can be exhausting, but that's why you hire someone to do that if you're not the person to do that. The next two are also really important. They kind of tie into the others. A pragmatic approach. focus on value. We're in a sort of a society, you've got that really short attention span, everyone's hitting up, 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 scroll, scroll, scroll. So you wanna make sure that you are delivering value as much as you can and kind of getting to the point, like appeal to the practical purchase habits of people. It doesn't mean you're going straight to the sale, but it means to what do I have to add to your life? Just kind of get to the point of integrating into the lifestyle. And the final piece sort of reflects the integration and inclusion and a little bit, but it's social good. We live in a time now where, you know, as much as the older generations might like to harp on Gen Z, I've never seen more like teenage kids from the Midwest talking about global issues than I do on TikTok. They really care. The generation is woketh. So if your brand is not authentically, because that's the number one most important, woke with them, you are going to lose. So I'm not going to spend too much time here on the history of influence, but what I really want to sort of have come up with over the past few years that's really helped me understand where we've been in the influencer world and why we are where we are today, which is what I described earlier as like the democratization piece. This is my map. It's called the 4 M's of influence, and it is sort of a cycle of all of the factors that play into where we are in terms of how we influence people to buy a product, be a part of our community, etc. And those 4 things are the message, which is like, what is the content that's being shared? The medium, what platforms is it being shared on? The messenger, who is doing the sharing, and the market, which is who is the intended audience. Ooh, this mic is gonna slide right out my ear, hold on. We're gonna hold it there until there we go. Okay, and that's who is the intended audience or end user. So as we look through history of influence, we are going to just take a look at how this cycle of these M's have changed. And so what we have, phase 1, is pre-2008. It's sort of the pre-online era of influencers. And it's actually also kind of pre-internet influence. So what that means is influence was kind of centralized with media and celebrities. So you guys probably remember this, pre-2008. There's limited options for advertising or for integrating, and it's very much more like unilateral and controlled messages. We're talking about like news outlets and tabloid magazines and reality television. Like we got everything that we advertised in like, I don't know, Us Weekly or Teen Vogue or whatever it was. So you had like the messengers that were controlling this were really behind the scenes people, producers and publicists and journalists, and typically like boomers and Gen X, but they were controlling what the younger generation was getting at. So like, I don't know if anyone in the early 2000s like plucked their eyebrows way too thin or like kind of, you know, was influenced by that era of like Paris Hilton style, but that kind of came from like, we didn't really have direct access to those people who were influencing us, but we were sort of told what was cool by this sort of overlord from above as far as media goes. Then we go into phase 2, which is like 2008 to 2014, and we see early pieces of influence start to move, that traditional media starts to move online, and that's where a few more voices are emerging. So those, like I talked about earlier, like the print publications are now going into online. We're getting the early onset of social media, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So you're getting like young millennial journalists and bloggers, such as myself in 2011 and 12. You're getting the first sort of photographers who are democratizing their art form on Instagram. That was pre-Facebook buy, and sort of your early adopter celebrities, your Ashton Kutchers and your Britney Spears or your Paris Hiltons and such, who were the first on Twitter, and you could kind of hear directly from them. But your influence is still not democratized. It's still kind of exclusive to the publications and the celebrities that have that kind of power to attract audiences, and they've just now gone online. So it's like curated. Then we move into phase 3. This is what I call the gate-kept era of social influence. We're talking like 2015 to just 2019, about a year before COVID. We see social media now opening up influence opportunities for the everyman and for the everyday person. Influencers are gaining massive reach. So we're seeing those influencers, their message is now more interactive, it's more independent, but it's still kind of polished and well curated. You know, those early days of Instagram influencers where you either had to be really, really good at content creation or you had a professional content team and everything was really, really curated. And there's still kind of limited access to that in the sense of you had to have a very specific skill set in order to be someone that is followed on social media and on the internet. So, but it's really the onset of the creator and influencer era. It's just not fully democratized yet. And so this is what happens. We see authenticity starting to pose a challenge because we know all these influencers who have gained millions of followers on Instagram and are hyper polished and curated, we're kind of like, I don't know if that's real, and it's kind of weird to me, and that's not really like my real life, and it creates this kind of like comparison culture and this authenticity obstacle. So we get to phase 4, which is what I love to call, is my favorite era that we're in right now, the democratization of influence. So within this cycle, what we have, this is the only time, if we go back to the last phase, you see everything is kind of moving this way in a cycle. What we have here is we still have that between the message and the medium, but what is going on is because the message is very much creator fueled, so TikTok introduces a platform where anyone can be discovered. You don't have to work so hard for followers because the algorithm supports discoverability. So you see more content on a For You page based on your interests than you see on the people you follow based on your network. And so what happens there is we've got this totally creator fueled and owned message. It's unregulated, it's limitless, it's more authentic, it's unpolished, it's raw. You see stuff on TikTok that you're just like, wow, like that is so real. Thank you for showing me that. And it's much more relatable. And you even see the platforms start to kind of come up with more candid ways to show those things off. So stories are obviously really popular because they're in the moment, etc. And what happens with that is that the market, the people who you are speaking to, and the messenger, the people who are speaking, start to kind of merge into one of the same because anyone can be a creator. So most Gen Z that are present on TikTok, whether they have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers or not, consider themselves creators. And that's where you get that distinction between creatorship and influence. And so with that, you've got these kind of millennials, Gen Zs, and as I like to sort of call myself, even though I've aged out, Z-lennials, who are like 16 to 25. And now your messengers are also your market. The people who are doing the talking are also doing the listening. And that's an awesome opportunity for brands to kind of capture this unrecognized army of loyal brand advocates who are platform experts at TikTok and know how to create great content at scale. And you don't just need to use them for their influence, you need to use them for their platform knowledge and what I referred to earlier, their social listening, where you can really connect with what they are doing. So now everyone can be an influencer or a creator. Consumers are the creators. There's a way bigger emphasis on authenticity, and brands have to adapt or they're going to be left behind. Okay, so this is where I had one of my cool polls, but I don't really know if it's still in here. But you know what? There's not that many of you in here, so maybe I could just get a few of you to answer a question for me. And that is just based on what you guys just saw about the evolution of where we are now and where we were before. Can a few of you tell me what you predict or what you think is going to come from influencer culture, let's say 2025 and beyond? Like, what is the next wave or the next stage based on this kind of cycle that I've just gone through? Anyone have any ideas or thoughts? Yes, sir.
I think product reviews, and seeing the evolution of new apps like the Flip app, things like that. We're going to see a trend of influencers moving to e-commerce platforms where it's strictly in reviews, like short form video content versus
Totally agree. I see influencers as being like their own kind of direct commerce platforms in that way, where there's like, we already know there's the TikTok shop and you're doing these things in real time and people can see the practical application and the use cases and then click directly to buy from those influencers who are affiliates, who get commission, but also a lot of influencers are starting to have equity in the brands that they're sponsoring, or they're actually their own brands because they're using their platforms. They're like, hey, I'm selling all these products for other people. If I just make my own line, that could work too. Any other thoughts? All right, cool. So we are going to go into part 2, which is crafting your creator strategy. So there are a few really important pieces to crafting a creator strategy, but the most important one before you do anything is really clearly defining your objectives and understanding your audience. So a few really important kind of triggers that I like to think about when I first get a brief, because let me be clear, getting a brief from a brand that says like, hey, we want, better brand awareness, or we want to convert this, that is not really defining the objective in the context of the program or the campaign that they're asking for. So there's still a lot of work to be done as the person who is going to create the campaign in terms of defining what I call like sub-objectives to the bigger brief that they've provided. So the first thing is you want to set your really clear goals. What are your specific measurable objectives, and align those goals with your audience's needs and behaviors. But now you have to ask yourself, okay, I want to align with my audience's needs and behaviors, but what the hell are my audience's needs and behaviors? I should figure that out. And this is where I encourage you all to go beyond demographics. So you really want to dive into what we call psychographics. Really look at, what are my audience's values? What are their attitudes? What are their interests? What do they care about? How do they behave? What are their online habits? How do they interact with content? Do they like long form content? Do they like short form content because of their short attention spans? Basically, the example I have is that, I was working on a beverage brand that their target audience was young boys aged 13 to 17. And we get the brief from the brand and they go, yeah, young boys aged 13 to 17. So they like video games and sports. And I'm like, yeah, that's a tale as old as time. They like video games and sports, but there's something different about Gen Z, isn't there? Like these new 13 to 17-year-old boys, I mean, they have different values. They kind of value expression more. They're like less of the stereotypical bullies maybe. So I started looking into like, all right, what is their perception of gender? And like, if we just bucket them all into like, okay, you guys are 13 to 17-year-old boys, like, you like video games and hockey, like who am I excluding by doing that? Because again, this is a generation, Gen Z, that really values authenticity and they really value expression. And the things that used to be really uncool and get 13 to 17-year-old boys like stuffed in a locker are no longer uncool. In fact, those guys are the ones with millions of followers on Twitch who are getting followed just for streaming their video games from mom's basement. So it's not just like your stereotypical like, oh, I want to reach 13 to 17-year-old boys, so let me go to these jocks and just like only talk to this section of cool kids. So it's really important to just go behind, sort of monitor and join the online conversation. So whatever campaign you're building really actually genuinely resonates and doesn't look like you're just a brand that's kind of out of touch. The next piece is embracing the algorithmic shift. So earlier I talked about how TikTok kind of created a world of discoverability where everything on social media used to be about who follows you seeing your content, and now it's just about the content fitting in to people's algorithms based on their interests. So you want to recognize that move and tailor the content to audience interests as opposed to just age and gender. And really look for creators whose algorithm is going to pick up on the audience that you want based on what they're interested in. And again, that's supported by going deeper on their interests and not just making assumptions about the fact that they like hockey and they like video games. The next piece, once you get into that really in-depth audience understanding, you're avoiding those traditional boxes, you're looking at how the digital culture has evolved. That's where you get in. I've given you a couple of statistics, like I've told you authenticity is important. When I did this research for this campaign, 92% of Gen Z believe that authenticity is the most important value. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. 92% is not a number you want to throw out the window when you have a target demographic and you're like, oh, authenticity, 92%? Okay, I'm going to really be like focus on that. And then, you know, we talked about things like social good. So go deeper than what I said in the upfront and really look at what they value. Look at cultural shifts and nuances, maybe gender norms, what's considered cool, recognize that rise of different creators, and engage with their internet. So this is a little silly trick that I have, but I have one member on each of my staff that has like a fake social media profile that they don't post on, but they engage only with, like, I basically have created 5 different prototypes of the typical audiences that my clients tend to interact with. And so they have that feed. Like, I have a junior staffer who has a feed that is targeted more to the young, you know, teenage boy, even though she is a 25-year-old woman. I have one that is a feed that is more for a Gen X, you know, 47-year-old woman who likes gardening, like just kind of set up these audience profiles, and the algorithm follows them that way to engage with their internet. So you're genuinely knowing, like, I can join this conversation, or, hey, I saw this cool trend happening in the 44-year-old gardening community. And then it's like, all right, now I know how to join that. And then the final stage is to adapt to the new cool. So understand that what's cool has changed. 50% of these kids are content creators now, 25% are aspiring professional content creators. So align your strategy with the current cool. And a big part of that, and I said it earlier, is please don't take yourselves too seriously as a business or brand. Nobody's interested. They just want to know you can play the game and have some fun when it's appropriate, of course. The next piece is kind of choosing platforms and content formats. So here, this is where you are gonna, you know, I get this question all the time. There's so many platforms. There's Instagram, there's TikTok, there's YouTube. Like, where should we be? What should we do? Should we post on all of them? And the truth is, there's no universal answer to that. It is something that you should think critically and challenge yourselves about. And so here's like a few factors that I typically look at when I am choosing my platforms and choosing my content format. I will say, before we jump into the sort of piece of these factors, is that short form video, and I'm sure this doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, is king. And video has always been king. Despite the rise of TikTok and the fact that it's a video platform, YouTube remains the #1 most used platform across all demographics in the world. With TikTok kind of trailing slightly behind, especially in the younger demographic, but video has always been king. Facebook has always chased video, they're chasing it now. TikTok is chasing video, and then they kind of play this game with each other where then Instagram's like, okay, wait, maybe we'll go back to photos, and then TikTok's like, jokes, I have a photo. So it's hard to decide because they're all sort of playing cat and mouse with each other, and they're all, rather than innovating, kind of one will innovate and then the rest will play copycat. We all know that. But with that said, there's a few factors that you can look at. So the first one you can look at is audience engagement. That's where you want to just, it might sound obvious, but identify platforms where your audience is the most active. And that, when I say the most active, I mean you want to analyze engagement metrics, you want to look at, you know, likes, comments, shares, but you also want to look at how they are interacting with that platform and with that content. So, you know, is that platform actually impacting their purchase decisions if your goal is conversion and purchase? You know, there's a huge hashtag campaign on TikTok called #TikTok made me buy it. So that's kind of an early indicator, like, ooh, maybe TikTok is influencing people's purchases. Then you want to ask yourself how, and if as a brand you're able to fit into that way of doing it, and what are the brands that have been successful if purchase is your end goal. Maybe brand awareness is your end goal, that's a different thing. The next is content format selection. So you want to really match your content type to the platform's strengths. So this is where you consider your audience preferences for things like long form or short form, images, text-based posts. And the truth is that a lot of this is about testing and learning. So it's not always about, okay, I'm just going to assume, you know, hey, TikTok, that's a video platform, everyone likes video. It's every brand has like a little bit of a different thing. So where budget permits, you want to create a few different formats and really test, does this work? Even within the formats though, it doesn't always mean it's a one size fits all. Even though YouTube has shorts and Instagram has reels and then TikTok has TikToks, and they're all 9:16 vertical short form video, It doesn't necessarily mean that you want to repurpose the exact same video on TikTok that you put on Instagram, that you put on YouTube. That also doesn't mean you have to invest a whole bunch of money creating net new content for Reels and YouTube Shorts and TikTok. But what it does mean is that you want to essentially look at what are the nuances between each platform, and maybe it's just the way that the text is overlaid. Maybe on Instagram there is no text overlay, and on TikTok there is text overlay. Or, you know, maybe you run the longer form version on Instagram and the shorter form version on TikTok. So everything is a bunch of testing and learning, but you want to be prepared to test and learn by developing as many formats as your budget allows and really trying to capture the nuance between each platform. You also want to look at things like the platform strengths. So, you know, utilizing video first platforms. Maybe there are more text-rich platforms for more detailed narratives. And then the other thing is the nature of your message. So maybe there is, you know, some messages that are more serious and informative, and some messages that are more entertaining and casual and fun. Maybe there's some that are like, you know, that your brand is really like a premium luxury brand and it's super aesthetic. Those are the kinds of nuances that can help you make platform decisions by looking at like what really works on that platform. So again, this might be a little stereotypical, but let's say Instagram, like we know that that has historically been a more polished, curated platform, and TikTok has been a more candid and entertaining platform. So when you look at your brand and where it fits, it's not always just about the audience, it's also about how that audience, you know, why are they on that platform more? If someone's on Instagram more than they're on TikTok, or they're on YouTube more than they're on Instagram, it's worth looking at why and just looking at what content seems to perform the best and not necessarily diving into the comment section. It will tell you everything you need to know about what people love or don't, so you can get ahead of brand perception issues, so you can get ahead of risk mitigation, but so also you can genuinely join the culture that you're trying to influence and be a part of. So jumping into the comment section, just do that in your life. Like even just not as a business owner, just understand sometimes it's dark and bleak and kind of scary, but it's pretty entertaining. And then you want to look at content resonance. So you want to test certain content themes. Maybe it's with focus groups or with smaller audience segments, and kind of adapt based on that feedback of like what is resonating and what people are talking about. And then really just, this is the biggest piece of advice that I have for you when building a creative territory, and it is be very, very quick to listen and very slow to talk. Start your listening process like 6 months, sometimes a year even, before your campaign is about to launch and before you start building the creative territory, because most of the time you're not talking to an audience that is directly in line with the people who are working on your campaign and who are building that campaign. So if you don't do that listening and then start joining the conversation. So let's say you have a brand page. Before you launch that campaign and that content, start engaging a little bit from the brand channel with audiences, contributing, having that visibility to existing online conversations. Are any of you aware of the recent viral sensation that is Risa Tisa? Can you raise your hand if you guys watched Risa Tisa? Oh, that's so sad. You guys should all watch Risa Tisa. Anyway, Risa Tisa is a now influencer with over 5 million followers on TikTok who published a 52-part series of 10-minute long TikToks called Who the F Did I Marry? And it was a story about her pathologically lying husband that she married during COVID, who basically like went and took her to see all these houses and to go to the BMW dealership and like printed out like airline tickets to London, and then would just never come through with any of these things and always had a reason and excuse. Anyway, she's a super viral sensation. And throughout the story, she had mentioned a lot of brands and things because he had taken her to the BMW dealership, and she had always wanted to shop at, I can't remember what premium store, and the London vacation she was booked to stay at the Hilton. All those brands were in her comment sections as these videos were going viral and being like, when you're ready for the Hilton, and BMW was like, we have you on the test drive. They knew this was going viral, so they didn't even have to hire Risa Tisa as their brand ambassador to show that they were culturally relevant and that they were joining the conversation. So engage with those audiences, join those online discussions, and then you can move into the stage where you create content that adds value and perspective to the conversation, which is the final stage of influencing and engaging. So you are going to basically develop narratives now that not only join but steer the conversation and position the brand as a thought leader and an influencer in its own right. This is a case study of a recent program that I ran that is sort of an execution around building a creative territory that works. It was for the brand Pure Leaf Iced Tea. How many of you guys drink Pure Leaf? Do you enjoy it? Do you know about it? Hopefully a lot. The campaign was called Yes to Real. So the ask that we were given was basically that Pure Leaf Iced Tea has always had an existing appeal to women who were aged 35 to 50. They'd run all their marketing historically to women aged 35 to 50, but they super under indexed with women aged 25 to 34. And they were now interested. They were launching a new product, a blackberry flavor, in order to appeal to that demographic of women aged 25 to 34. And they wanted us to come up with an influencer campaign that would essentially resonate with that demographic. They had done some social listening and some research that showed that their previous message that worked for who they called Liz, which was the 35 to 50-year-old woman, wasn't going to work with the 25 to 35. With Liz, the older Liz, they had focused on that sort of premium and that high quality. That wasn't the message that the younger demographic cared about. And so as their manager for this campaign, again, went in, did my social listening, but also I'm in the demographic of women aged 25 to 34, so that was convenient. I spend a lot of time on the women aged 25 to 34-year-old internet, and one of the biggest things that we're exhausted with, and this is not just from TikTok, but this is from all of our past life, of this like just people being really inauthentic and women being really inauthentic online and women showing their perfect lives and all of these things. And Pure Leaf is a product where their biggest sort of functional message about the product is that they use 100% real tea leaves. They don't have any additives or added sugar, fake coloring, all that kind of stuff. So they basically told us that that was a really important functional message, and they wanted to find a way to get that message to resonate. So essentially what we did was we looked at the conversation happening online around realness with this because of their 100% real tea leaves. And we decided that we were going to create an entire campaign around the idea of saying yes to real. So basically busting down the doors of all of the influencers and all of the messages that kind of show this perfectly curated, polished lifestyle for women that make all the women 25 to 34 insecure, comparing themselves to each other, and just align that message of saying yes to your realness and your authenticity with the message of real brewed iced tea. So basically we engaged 2 macro or mega influencers and 24 nano and smaller influencers to represent the wide variety of ages that's in that 25 to 34. And we, again, let go of demographics. So we just allowed this to be a universal thing that we wanted women to focus. And we found the most real influencers that we could. The ones who talk about their struggles with body image, the ones who talk about their struggles with mental health, the ones who talk about how difficult it is to, work and manage a relationship and do all of these things, and who aren't like hiding behind this perfect life. And I think this will play. So this is just one of the videos, but as I mentioned, we engaged 24 nano influencers and 2 macros who gave us like 6 pieces of content each that helped us introduce this campaign.
Mindset changes that made a real difference in my 20s. I work out because I love my body, not because I hate it. I stopped comparing my life to others. We all have different journeys. I accepted the fact that my body will change, but my work won't. My body deserves to be fueled with real ingredients like this Pure Leaf Iced Tea made with real fruit tea.
At the end there, you can see that she's asked her audience to duet that video and let them know what changes they've made in their mindset and their life. One of the things I want to call out about this video that I think makes it so special is that we didn't benchmark the key brand message, but we also didn't lead with the key brand message. It used to be this sort of golden rule of marketing that you had to have the brand and the key message present in the first like 3 seconds because of that drop off. But we just really wanted to speak to the woman who was working on herself and making these mindset changes and learning to love herself more. And so we waited until actually the last 20% of the video to say, like this Pure Leaf real brewed iced tea. And of course there are people who can tell it's an ad in the upfront just because the product is present, but it should look as much as possible like it's not an ad and be non-disruptive to the consumer scrolling experience. This campaign saw a 23% increase in positive sentiment than a typical Pure Leaf branded campaign, and then its traditional brand messages. It saw 15 times higher engagement than traditional brand messages, 6.9 points increase in ad recall, 2.3 points increase in intent to purchase the Pure Leaf product, and 1.5 points in top of mind awareness, all amongst women aged 25 to 34. So I would consider that pretty successful. And I'm very thrilled with the idea of, and again, this was kind of a first time sell to the brand to say like, hey guys, take a back seat, be willing to integrate in an authentic way with this community of women and what they're talking about online and what's affecting them online. And the brand saw the results and now they're doing it again and again and again and again. So we are loving that. I don't have too much time left today, but your last step in this is really selecting and vetting your creators. So you've chosen your creative territory. We wanted to say yes to real, right, with Pure Leaf. We chose, that was a woman by the name of Spencer Barbosa. She was one of our macro influencers who has like 8 million followers, which was crazy, but we didn't choose her because she had 8 million followers. We also worked with a lot of nano influencers who had like 2,500 followers to build a similar narrative and create movement and create momentum around that. But this is where you get into the space where once you've chosen, once we like decided, yes to real is our narrative, we need to select and vet the creators based on how authentic this message is going to feel and integrate with the content that they already put out so that it's in line with what their audience expects, and then empower them and trust them as platform experts to deliver the message through the lens of what their audience expects and that won't disturb their audience. So the first piece of that is do that authenticity check. Go in, assess the creator's genuine passion for your product category. Don't choose creators who frequently switch niches for different endorsements and different things. Really look for the one. It's okay if they have lots of brand deals. Someone like Spencer with 8 million followers has a lot of brand deals, but it's about looking for, do her values kind of transcend through those different brand deals and endorsements and also through her organic content. Then you want to look at that brand values alignment. Does that creator embody your brand's ethos? Do not compromise on the values fit for the sake of reach. It's never gonna work. I would rather have a TikTok account or an influencer with fewer followers who's really aligned than have one with tons of followers that isn't aligned. Of course, we're gonna look at things like audience engagement. So again, we were living in a time before where influencers were used just for influence. This is about mass reach as many people as possible. But now you really wanna be looking for creators with high interaction rates, not just follower counts, and you don't wanna ignore the context of that engagement. So focus on their sentiment as well. Are they getting positive interactions or negative interactions when they post certain things? How is their audience interacting with them? Then you want to look at things like content consistency. Do they have a history of quality and consistency? Certainly want to vet them and not overlook past controversies or off-brand messages or things that are going to, you don't want to have a campaign that's about yes to real and you scroll down their content from a year ago and they have all of this stuff and all this fake things and their comments are negative around this that say, hey, you're so fake, but they made a pivot. Like, you want to know that consistency has existed across, a long time, because people do go and find the receipts. They will find the receipts. They will always find the receipts. After, what happened with George Floyd, and then a whole bunch of brands started, hiring Black influencers and influencers of color and putting more diversity. It was one of the biggest criticisms that people looked back like 6 months before, a year before, and said, well, this is like just a sudden change that you've made, like all of a sudden you're awake. And again, it's okay to make a sudden change, but you have to be real and transparent and authentic about the fact that you're learning and you're making a sudden change. You can't just expect that audiences are stupid. They want that transparency transparency. The last two, so that I spoke to that transparency, collaboration and willingness. You want creators who are really open to co-creating content. They don't just want you to dictate the terms. You don't want to engage with ones who are very rigid, because they are going to have to work with you on how do I integrate the brand messages, etc. So that's a really important piece of doing it all. I am going to kind of move past this piece in terms of where we are, but I will say, as far as like the scale of the influence, but I will leave you with the fact that, as I mentioned on that Pure Leaf campaign, yes, we worked with influencers who were mega influencers with 8 million followers. They were like the engine of a plane, and they were the ones that helped the campaign take off and get that mass reach. That push-pull, though, that really sustained the narrative and allowed us to infiltrate the TikTok universe with authenticity was then all of those nano-creators that we worked with. They're like the wings that keep the plane flying. So if you have a message that you want to authentically resonate with an audience, it's not enough to just hit it and quit it or set it and forget it. You want to have a plan to sustain that message, and for most budgets, that plan means you're going to work with smaller influencers who can deliver the content volume at scale. So that's kind of where we are. I'm going to skip past all this fun stuff. However, I am very open to sending these materials so that you guys can learn a little bit more about measuring success and knowing sort of when to pivot and all that kind of stuff. And lastly, if you would like to connect with me further, you can scan that fun little QR code. It has all of my details and my LinkedIn and email and all of that kind of stuff. And it's been such a pleasure to speak to you all today. Do I have time to take one or two questions, or do you want to move on?
You take questions if you want. I got your chat box over here.
Hey! Anyone have any questions?
Show me a hand. Somebody show me a hand. Go on to the right. Swing it over here. Coffee, if you let me. Can you catch this thing?
Nice.
All right. You talk a lot about authenticity, which is great. With all the AI stuff coming out, we have, like that musician playing Coachella this weekend. That's, AI. Like, how do you see that with brands playing in that space?
Oh, my favorite question. I won't pretend to be an expert, although I am certainly paying very close attention. One thing I'll say about the AI movement and authenticity is you hear two major concerns from our sort of global populace of people who all know we have to embrace the AI movement. It's here whether we like it or not, and it's here to help us in many, many ways. But the two main things that you hear, the first one is obviously, it's gonna take all our jobs. And the second one that you hear is, but is it gonna be art still and the things that we need if it lacks that sort of element of humanity and connection? And when the AI makes 100%, if the AI makes 100% of the music or 100% of the films or 100% of the content and it's not behind real people, are we going to be able to connect with it in a way that is, real and true and really kind of adheres to our needs as human beings? And the truth is that that's yet to be determined. I believe that for the time being, AI is here to help support people in crafting messages and support influencers, support brands, and supporting people in crafting messages that are going to resonate better by kind of putting efficiency towards that system. It just has more information on getting to know people in that sort of social listening and research and insights process. And I think it still kind of requires human beings to give it the prompts that it needs in order to create something that resonates and still feels authentic. I do think that ultimately, if it is an AI robot or something that ends up delivering all of our creative content, that the best stuff that works and that will resonate will still be kind of prompted to machine learn. Effectively, that's where AI is, to machine learn all of the things that we really need authentically and that make us sort of tick and that is successful in that way. So I know it's not a super clear and pointed answer, and I don't have it all the way, but I'd like to believe that humanity is still going to be required even in the programming and the prompting of what we're going to see in AI for as long as we possibly can, in order to maintain and just have it kind of enhance the connectivity that we feel as opposed to taking away from it. At least I hope that's the case. Might be optimistic, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess, but like, what about in the images or the content itself? So like, like an influencer versus like an AI created influencer or brand, like, are you seeing backlash there at all, or do you see, people even be able to tell, like, that's, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's all about the people behind that bot that programmed that AI influencer. So I think, while yes, the actual product itself or the presentation of that product might come out through AI and through an AI influencer or an AI musician, ideally what has gone into the program to create that content is still, I sort of consider AI and prompting it as similar to like briefing an influencer or like the process whereby you input the signals that you want to kind of maximize for connectivity. It's to be determined. It's to be determined.
Anybody else?
Other thoughts, questions?
You didn't make you walk all the way over there, Greg.
I'll shout it. I got a big voice.
We love that. So do I.
I was curious earlier. You mentioned about making different social presences do social listening. How extensive or how big are those different presences? It's something I've thought about but never really did extensively, and I'm curious what your outcomes have been with it, and really what have you discovered in that process? So, like you said, older gardener.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what we'll do is we'll start it. So at least at my company, we have, we typically work with the same portfolio of at my agency of about like 12 brands, and they don't all have distinct profiles, but a lot of them do. And we have it so that we're not starting that listening right when we get the campaign brief. Like, this is a process that we started as soon as we kind of realized that we could. So that means that social listening and that sort of feeding the algorithm to create that For You page is happening all year long ahead of before we even get the campaign brief, so that we're monitoring the constantly changing nature of that audience and of that demographic. It doesn't mean we're logging on every single day, but we're trying to, with the TikTok algorithm specifically, the more you like or engage with a particular piece of content, or if you repost it, if you watch it for even longer, it sort of tells or triggers the algorithm that you are interested in that stuff and you want to receive more of that content. And the most important thing to make it successful is that you trigger it to receive as much content as possible. So I have my juniors doing that, logging on to those accounts about 2-3 times a week. They're not posting from those accounts. They're not doing too much. They do have like little profiles and little avatars and stuff, because also that supports the algorithm, and you don't want it to think you're a robot, you're a real person. But I've seen a great deal of success with it. It's not always 100%, but it is, and I think AI eventually again will help support doing this in a way that it won't have to be so manual, but it kind of creates a level of personability where, unless you're doing like right when the campaign comes and you start searching and you start trying to dive in, it's just more effective because it's more consistent streams of content. So you don't have to worry about what's trending in that exact moment. You're kind of consistently trend monitoring week over week. So I do recommend building avatars. I think it's been really successful for us. One of the great successful examples that we had was for a Courvoisier campaign that I did. It ended up winning gold medal for best use of influencers in Canada. I'm Canadian, in Canada. And part of that was we were really tapping into Canada's community of creatives and musicians and artists. And the reason it's sort of the idea to do the avatars came up for me because I was one of the few people at my agency who was deeply embedded in Canada's creative community of musicians and artists. So I already knew what this community and culture was talking about because I'm a part of it, and none of my colleagues did. And so I kept thinking about, well, what if I wasn't here? Like, my colleagues would have written some form of campaign narrative that resonated, but I believe we won that gold medal because I authentically really understood what was happening in the conversation, because I was on Canadian creative Twitter. Like, that's where I was. I was on that Instagram and TikTok. So that's where the idea to do profiles and avatars was born from, and it's been really successful ever since. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, just have, you or your juniors or whoever it is checking in on those profiles maybe twice a week and feeding the algorithm by just watching a string of content for maybe an hour.
and liking and engaging and even reposting.
Thank you so much, Corinne.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
Thank you all so much. Feel free to get in contact with me with any other questions.
I'm sitting at